뿐만 아니라 내가 내 손에 들어오는 것들이 나한테 꼭 필요한 건지, 이게 나한테 정말 유용한 건지 이런 생각을 좀 해보면 좋겠어요. 나는 버려지는 철사에 새 삶을 주는 그리너다.
Are you curious about Korean cultural heritage?
If you are a fan of Korean culture and history, listen up. Korean cultural heritage is based on a 5,000-year history.
The whole country is like a massive museum because it possesses such diverse cultural properties. Let's not wait any longer and take a look.
First, for beginners, for those who are not familiar with Korea, let's start with the world-famous list.
You can see how Korea's beautiful traditional patterns and historical features have been preserved.
And don't forget to experience Korea's intangible cultural heritage. From Gangang-sule to Talchum, there's just so many exciting cultural heritages to experience.
These are for intermediate level tourists who have already visited Korea and its famous attractions. You might even be standing in a World Heritage Site right now.
How about searching for intangible cultural heritage that you can experience? 한소리, 제주 해녀 diving, 김장. Make some unforgettable memories while having fun.
Last but not least, the advanced level. It's the memory of the World Register. Korea possesses an extensive documentary heritage. Korea is serious about documentation and preservation.
A tour of Korean cultural heritage will become a legacy of your own.
Why not make your own Korean cultural heritage travel itinerary?
Isn't it fascinating?
North Korea appears to have stopped its noise broadcast toward South Korea as of Thursday, less than a day after the South shut off its loudspeaker broadcast the previous day as part of efforts to ease the tensions between the two Koreas. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is ready and open to dialogue with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, while acknowledging reports that the North Korean side repeatedly rejected Trump's letter to Kim. President Jae-myung continues to put emphasis on public safety by making a surprise visit to the site of the October 29 Itaewon disaster, as well as the Han River Flood Control Center ahead of the early monsoon season. Good evening. Peaceful silence is back in the border areas between the two Koreas. Following South Korea's suspension of propaganda broadcast on Wednesday, the North followed suit the next day. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung starts us off.
North Korea's first response to the new South Korean administration's move has been to mutually reduce tensions. Pyongyang appears to have paused its broadcast of loud noises towards South Korea on Thursday, following South Korea's suspension of loudspeaker messages the day before. According to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the South Korean military has not detected any broadcasts since late last night, though it needs to see if the pause will continue.
There are no areas where we can currently hear the broadcast, though it stopped late last night, and there were certainly no broadcasts early this morning or at dawn. It is uncertain whether this will continue in the afternoon. We're keeping a close eye on the situation.
This follows the South Korean military's move to halt loudspeaker broadcasts against the North in border areas the day before, in accordance with President Lee's order.
President Lee Jae-myung recently made this decision as a proactive measure to ease tensions, given the absence of any significant provocations from North Korea. This action is aimed at elevating the military standoff between the two Koreas and opening the way for restoring mutual trust.
The halt came for the first time in a year since the former administration resumed the broadcast last June, for the first time in 6 years, in response to North Korea flying trash-filled balloons across the border. For now, the JC has said there are no changes to scheduled plans to conduct training in border areas. With the first step taken to allay inter-Korean tensions, eyes are on whether this could serve as a momentum for President Lee to push his presidential campaign pledge, reversing the full suspension of the September 19th inter-Korean military agreement. An expert says it won't be easy to do it quickly.
If things develop further, the restoration of inter-Korean communication and liaison channels could pave the way for dialogue. However, I believe there are still many obstacles to fully restoring the September 19 military agreement.
As restoring the agreement is something that cannot be done unilaterally or preemptively, the expert added it should be pushed forward in a planned manner. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Also on Thursday, President Lee Jae-myung pledged to make efforts to quickly restore dialogue channels with North Korea. In a statement delivered by his political affairs secretary on the 25th anniversary of the 2000 Inter-Korean Summit, Lee said he will end the exhausting hostilities and restore dialogue and cooperation with Pyongyang. He added that his administration will do everything it can to build a peaceful, cooperative, and thriving Korean peninsula. U.S. President Donald Trump may be looking to reopen talks with North Korea, but Pyongyang isn't picking up. A new report says the regime rejected a letter sent by Trump to the leader Kim Jong-un. Our correspondent Kim Jong-sil has the story.
A relationship once hailed as groundbreaking is back in the headlines. President Trump reportedly sent a letter to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, hoping to revive stalled dialogue. According to NK News on Wednesday, citing a high-level source, multiple in-person delivery attempts to North Korean diplomats at the United Nations were made, but each time they bluntly refused to accept it. Asked about the matter, the White House did not deny the report.
The president remains receptive to correspondence with Kim Jong-un, and he'd like to see the progress that was made at that summit in Singapore. As for specific correspondence, I'll leave that to the president to answer.
Analysts say North Korea's refusal may reflect a deeper dissatisfaction with Washington's unchanged stance toward Pyongyang.
North Korea likely remains deeply skeptical of exchanging personal letters when there's been no real change in what it sees as a hostile U.S. policy. For Kim Jong-un, rejecting Trump's letter also signals that his distrust of Trump still runs deep.
At the same time, Pyongyang appears to be doubling down on its ties with Moscow.
North Korea is gaining significantly from its cooperation with Russia and moving toward a deeper strategic relationship. Engaging in close talks with the U.S. now could send the wrong signal to Moscow. So for Pyongyang, there's little incentive to accept Trump's letter.
Experts say Pyongyang likely hasn't forgotten that some past letter exchanges were made public during Trump's first term, something the North might have viewed as both risky and disrespectful. With Trump's limited time in office, analysts say North Korea is unlikely to engage with the U.S. unless Washington signals a clear policy shift, possibly including sanctions relief or other long-sought concessions. For now, the letter remains unopened, and the future of U.S.-North Korea dialogue is just as sealed. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has sent a congratulatory letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin in honor of Russia Day. According to the North Sea-run Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, in the letter, Kim called Russia a brotherly nation and said Pyongyang and Moscow share an unbreakable comrade-in-arms relationship. The letter was delivered by North Korean ambassador to Russia, Shin Hong-chul, to Russia's foreign ministry to mark Russia Day on June 12th, a national holiday marking the formation of the Russian Federation. While North Korea's state media had traditionally released Kim's Russia Day letter without context since last year, the KCNA has also reported on the delivery process before publishing the full text. South Korea's unification ministry said it doesn't see any particular significance in the latest exchange. It was just a routine message sent annually. President Jae-myung visited a local flood control center today ahead of the upcoming rainy season, putting emphasis on safety. At the same time, the new leader, who's just in his second week in office, has been bolstering communication with Parliament and the press throughout the week. Our senior top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Appearing in a yellow civil defense uniform, South Korea's new president was at a flood control center of the Hangang River in Seoul on Thursday to check readiness as the nation braces for the summer rainy season.
우리 국민들의 생명과 안전, 재산의 피해를 막는 것이 가장 중요하다. 잘 먹고 잘 사는 문제, 민생의 문제도 중요하지만 그것보다 가장 중요한 일은 국민들의 생명과 안전을 지키는 일이라는.
Present at the meeting were related officials, where he called for an overhaul of flood-prone areas, as well as the flood warning system. He went on to emphasize the responsibility of the officials in charge of public safety, as he vowed to better empower them and improve compensation. Also in line with this, President Jae-myung suddenly stopped by the alleyway in Seoul's Itaewon neighborhood, where the disastrous crowd crush claimed the lives of more than 150 people around 3 years ago. He laid flowers and observed a moment of silence at Memorial Alley. On his way back to the office, he spoke with nearby merchants, asking them how their businesses were doing. Other than focusing on people's livelihoods during his second week in office, the new president has made a move to bolster communication with Parliament. E's Secretary for Political Affairs, Woo Sang-ho, paid a visit to the National Assembly for the third straight day on Thursday to meet the leadership of political parties, underscoring the need for cooperation across the aisle. It's taken as the president demonstrating his recognition of them as partners in charge of state affairs. Also conspicuous to the press corps covering the president was Yi unexpectedly stopping by at a cafeteria at the top office to have lunch and coffee with reporters in a casual setting for 3 days in a row this week. It's widely seen as a move to bolster communication with the press at the early stage of his presidency. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
President Yi also continues to engage with his foreign counterparts, today holding phone calls with the leaders of Australia and Vietnam. Our Presidential Office correspondent Song Yoo-jin has more.
It was a busy day of diplomacy for President Lee Jae-myung on Thursday, holding phone calls with the leaders of two of South Korea's comprehensive strategic partners. In the afternoon, President Lee spoke with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. According to the presidential office, the pledge to strengthen cooperation in national defense, clean energy, and critical minerals, building on the long-standing trust and solidarity forged since Australia's participation in the Korean War in the 1950s. They also discussed working together to promote peace on the Korean Peninsula and to achieve meaningful progress on the North Korean nuclear issue. Cooperation for the successful hosting of the 2025 APEC summit in Gyeongju City was mentioned as well, as both countries are founding members of the regional forum. Both sides agreed to hold in-person talks to discuss concrete ways. Earlier in the day, the South Korean leader spoke with Vietnamese President Jong-un. Similarly, their focus was on further developing their partnership.
The two leaders agreed to expand and deepen bilateral cooperation in strategic sectors such as high-speed rail and nuclear energy.
President Yi requested Vietnam's continued interest and support for Korean companies operating there, to which President Gong responded positively. Gong also invited Yi to Vietnam, to which he said he looks forward to in-depth discussions to strengthen bilateral ties during his visit. So these are President Yi's fifth and sixth phone conversations with world leaders since taking office last Wednesday. His diplomatic efforts continue ahead of next week's G7 summit in Canada, where he's expected to meet several of the leaders he spoke to face-to-face. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Amid the flurry of first phone calls and preparations for President Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic debut at the G7, it seems South Korea's bureaucracy is quickly moving to support the new administration's so-called pragmatic diplomacy. Now, even without a new foreign minister having been named. Our Oh Soo-young tells us more.
South Korea's new diplomatic doctrine under President Lee Jae-myung is quickly taking shape, and pragmatism is the key word. Since his electoral campaign, Lee has repeatedly emphasized that while the Korea-US alliance remains the foundation of Seoul's foreign policy, he intends to pursue a broader, more flexible diplomatic course that does not shy away from engagement with China and Russia. Analysts say Lee's approach marks a notable shift from the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government's diplomacy, which aligned with former President Joe Biden's value-based cooperation with allies. Legislator Kim Jun-young, a former advisor to Moon Jae-in and former head of the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, frames it this way.
Yoon Suk-yeol said always the value-based diplomacy. But in fact, it is like almost like a Cold War kind of ideological camp. Let's say U.S., Korea, Japan is a good side. And North Korea, China, and Iran, Russia, these are, so divided into two words, so that means it's like a war. By saying pragmatism, he trying to go for national interest rather than ideological right and wrong things.
Pragmatism is also needed to reflect the shifting geopolitical reality. With the Trump administration's transactional approach to alliances resurfacing, South Korea faces hard bargaining over defense cost-sharing, trade and industrial policy.
His target is more like old friends and allies. And by saying that, he said a tariff. So that means now is a payback time. Mm-hmm. So you should pay tariff to make trade relation more fair. And he wants to correct security umbrella. So it's not free anymore. So these are, of course, not just Korean, other allies in the whole world. But most upgraded or highest level of alliance is Korea, Japan, and NATO.
To navigate such shifting dynamics, the Yi administration is signaling its desire to widen diplomatic options. In her inauguration speech on Wednesday, newly appointed Second Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jin-ah emphasized collaboration with diverse players beyond host traditional partners. She said this would help reduce dependence on specific countries and contribute to securing autonomy and flexibility in Korea's diplomacy. With immediate challenges to address, the Yi administration this week appointed the first and second deputy foreign ministers before it names a new foreign minister, which requires parliamentary approval. This, according to experts, signals the Yi administration's intention to swiftly coordinate and initiate policy in accordance with the pragmatic diplomacy mantra ahead of impending negotiations with the US and global engagements, including at the G7 summit starting June 15. 오수영, Arirang News.
Now, following President Jae-myung's election win last week, one of the biggest talking points is whether the government is going to come up with a supplementary budget. With the current economic situation, how much spending by the government is feasible and necessary is a question, but President Yi has been adamant about spending more. We have our economic correspondent Kim Do-yeon in studio to tell us more details. Good evening, Do-yeon.
Good to be here.
So, Do-yeon, since a supplementary budget is coming, it's not a question anymore.
That's right, Dami. First, it's been a bit more than a week, and he has been focusing on the economy, as we've seen. He, in fact, signed his first executive order to kick off an emergency economic response task force and met with them twice already. On top of this, his first public appearance outside of the presidential office was his visit to the Korea Exchange yesterday. Now, let's listen to his acceptance speech and see how he's trying to boost the economy.
민생 회복과 경제 살리기부터 시작하겠습니다. 불황과 일전을 치른다는 각오로 비상경제 대응 TF를 곧바로 지금 즉시 가동하겠습니다. 국가 재정을 마중물로 삼아 경제의 선순환을 되살리겠습니다.
Now notice he says the nation's finances, so we know the government spending will increase. Before we get to it though, let's also break down where the economy stands right now, as he called the current situation a recession, looking at the most recent data. Now this comes against the backdrop of South Korea's economy struggling, with the Korea Development Institute labeling the current situation subdued. For the first quarter, the nation's economy shrank. This report says the country's gross domestic product from January to March shrank by 0.2% on quarter, unchanged from an estimate in April. Sectors like construction and services are struggling especially.
You know, Do-yeon, if there is an extra budget to tackle this, what can we expect? I mean, we can expect a speedy passing of the budget bill as expected, right?
That's right, Dami. First and foremost, unlike the previous government, Lee Jae-myung administration has the backing of the parliament. Lawmakers from the DP are calling for at least 20 trillion won, or 14.5 billion US dollars. Let's take a listen to the then floor leader of the DP addressing this.
We'll introduce a supplementary budget to ease the burden on people's daily lives and deliver policies that make a real difference. At the same time, we won't stop investing in South Korea's future.
The primary focus, just because this will affect everyone, seems to be boosting domestic spending. Now, to achieve this, Yi has been for some time now calling for a universal cash payout for 250,000 Korean won for everyone. This could be a form of local currency as well. Some lawmakers also call for a selective distribution. Now, this is something that will help the service sector, especially. We saw a drop in jobs in the hotels and restaurant sector for the first time in 15 months, and the biggest drop since COVID-19. But domestic spending could help this.
Providing payments in the form of local currency can help boost the regional economy. So we could see a temporary increase in spending, particularly in sectors like services, lodging, and dining, which may lead to a slight uptick in employment.
Doyeon, I wouldn't mind the universal cash payout, but there are concerns that could lead to inflation if some sort of cash is distributed.
That's right. That's probably the biggest concern for some of the opposing lawmakers. However, the Bank of Korea also agrees that boosting domestic spending is more urgent and a speedy supplementary budget is needed. On top of this, even with the second supplementary budget of the year, there won't be much of an impact on inflation. The bank did refrain from saying the right amount of money for the budget, but it did warn, of course, that too much will hurt the nation's economy later. This came through a written statement to a liberal lawmaker's question today.
Right, now the supplementary budget isn't just about this. It'll also deal with certain industries like his pledge to before, right?
That's right. There are certain industries that need help. One of the most struggling industries right now is the construction sector. It has been shrinking for some time. Take a listen to an expert on why it's so important to support this sector.
In construction, every 1 billion won in revenue creates around 12 jobs. It's an industry where working-class people, those who rely on labor to make a living, benefit the most.
In addition, there needs to be investments made to ensure that industries struggling from U.S. tariffs can survive the hard times. This includes steel and automakers. Plus, sectors like AI need consistent development, and funds could be used to make sure the nation's strategic industries don't lag behind.
Indeed. Doyeon, thank you so much for coming in today. I'll see you around.
Thank you for having me.
The rainy season started on Jeju Island already today. It's a week earlier than usual and the third earliest rainy season ever. It will start to rain in Jeollanam-do Province and Gyeongsang-nam-do Province by dawn tomorrow. By the end of the day, rain will spread to the southern parts of the Chungcheong-do provinces. As for the amount of rainfall, about 150 millimeters of strong rain is expected in Jeju Island and more than 200 millimeters in the mountainous areas. Some areas will have rain pouring at 20 to 40 millimeters per hour at some point. Heavy rain of more than 100 millimeters is forecast around the south coast and 5 to 40 millimeters in the Chungcheong-do provinces. Seoul, Daejeon, Daegu, Busan, and Jeju will start off at 19 degrees Celsius. Daily highs will move up to 30 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 28 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Rain will continue until Monday across the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
누나가 발레를 하다 보니까 자연스럽게 누나 발레 학원에 따라가서 누나가 하는 모습을 보니까 저도 하고 싶다고 생각이 조금 들어서 발레 음악에 맞춰서 아무 춤이나 추다 보니까 그냥 그 음악에 맞춰서 제가 몸을 움직이는 게 재밌다고 느껴졌었는지 발레를 계속 하고 있더라고요. 나이가 좀 어릴 때 제가 가진 장점이 무엇인지도 모르고 아예 제가 가진 단점도 모를 때 발레를 시작했다 보니까 제일 큰 문제가 이제 평발이었던 것 같아요. 평발이다 보니까 발레를 할 때 쥐가 조금 많이 나는 편이라 그거를 견뎌가면서 춤을 계속 춰야 했던 거 그게 가장 극복하기 힘들었던 것 같고요. 제가 다리가 다른 친구들보다 조금 두껍다고 해서 제 다리를 조금 싫어했었는데 근데 이제 로잔에 갔다 오고 나서 오히려 제 다리에서 나오는 파워풀한 힘이 좋았다고 해주시는 분들도 있다는 걸 느껴가지고 그 두 개가 가장 극복하기도 힘들었고 기억에 남는 것 같아요. 프릭스티 로잔이라는 콩쿨 자체가 학생들 사이에서는 가장 크고 의미 있는 콩쿨이다 보니 제가 그 로잔 영상을 보면서 자라왔기 때문에 그 무대에 서서 제가 춤을 췄다는 것 자체가 엄청 인상 깊었던 것 같아요. 제가 걸어왔던 길, 이게 맞는 방법일까? 근데 그런 의구심을 다 없앨 수 있게 제가 가는 길이 맞았다라는 거를 확인시켜줬던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 감정이 들어서 조금 감격스러웠던 것 같아요. 한 배역에만 잘 할 수 있는 묘용수가 아니라 어떠한 배역을 받아도 다 넣어서 소화해낼 수 있는 그런 스펙트럼이 넓은 묘용수가 되고 싶습니다.
Welcome to the Globalists. Welcome to the Globalists. Welcome to the Globalists. We're in a new set, a brand new set.
I am a globalist. And I'm the globalist.
And I'm the globalist who wants to bring Jang right into your kitchen.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. South Korea is entering a new phase of national transformation, one driven by artificial intelligence. President Lee Jae-myung's administration has declared AI a top-tier strategic priority, pledging 100 trillion Korean won, roughly $72 billion in public and private investment. From the creation of a centralized AI control tower within the presidential office to launch of the regionally distributed data centers, Korea aims to become one of the top 3 global AI powers. With OpenAI now establishing a Seoul branch, and with Korea still facing gaps in model development and industrial adoption, the question is whether the country can turn this momentum into long-term leadership. For a deeper discussion on this, we are joined here in the studio by Andrew Lim, Research and Innovation Attaché at the Quebec government here in Seoul. A big welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And also to my right, we're also joined by Dr. Gulnush Fornadi, Assistant Professor of Computer Science at McGill University in Manila. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start our discussion right away, starting with Dr. Fornadi. So under the President Lee Jae-myung administration, the presidential office will include a chief secretary for future AI strategy. How do you think this centralized approach could impact some, cooperation with international countries?
I think this is a great opportunity for top players in Korea to collaborate. It can be a Ministry of AI or MEIE and Korean government. But there's also a lot of collaboration happening already between Quebec and Canada and Korea. And I think that can integration can actually facilitate this kind of collaboration. Last year, I've been in Korea as part of delegation of Ivado, and we actually host some of the startups at Milo, which showing this kind of collaboration we're going on. And I think this kind of centralization actually helping this kind of navigation organization for this. There's also, Korea is so big and there are so many AI players, and I think that can also help for managing this better. Quebec is also doing so much of collaboration. So for example, I have a lab that I'm collaborating with MasterCards for facing this EU Act, privacy laws and fairness laws. But also I'm working with, for example, Dubai, for creating language model for Arabic languages. So this kind of international collaboration are very common in Quebec, and I think this can actually facilitate this centralized approach in Korea.
Definitely. A clear command structure could definitely streamline cross-border alignment as well. Now, also, one of the biggest bets under that vision, Mr. Lim, is that Korea plans to launch this K-Mistral model, which comes after France's Mistral AI, and it's also the part of a 100 trillion Korean won investment project, of course. How realistic do you think is this model, and do you expect a success?
It's a great question. Just for the audience, Mistral AI, it's a multimodal LLM, a little bit like ChatGPT, where yes, you could have text, but also video and imaging, so it's a very good system. But what's quite interesting is Mistral is France, so we just first have to think about the France ecosystem. Of course, France has the EU. Of course, they have a great Horizon research network, whatnot. So I'm not saying Korea cannot do this, but I would say Korea lacks some of these parts that France has, like the ecosystem to be able to actually create something like Mistral AI. I always mention things like Korea might lack a bit of the infrastructure. Yes, they do have some NVIDIA chips, graphic cards like the H100 series, but it's still a bit lacking. Also, talent is a bit lacking as well. We'll talk about in other questions. So these kind of key factors like talent, infra, Korea does have some of this, but France, I think, has a bigger ecosystem within the EU framework. Yes, they have other countries right beside them to work with. They have many great research university networks, and Korea does have some of this, but I feel that Korea needs to expand on this, because AI isn't just like a one-day thing, but it's kind of a comprehensive technology.
But having this as a model would definitely, help Korea boost its development.
Yes, absolutely.
By looking at it as well. Now, but investment actually alone cannot guarantee its impact. Despite leading AI patents per capita, South Korea still lags in industrial adoption. How do you think Korea can, collaborate with other countries to help close that gap?
I think Canada is a good example for international collaboration. Canada has a CFAR program that actually brought so many international researchers to be at Canada. And it also creates so many standardization around AI. So for instance, Montreal Declaration of AI is going back to 2019, right? So kind of like how we can think about ethical approaches. Government of Canada has also created standardization. So Korea can actually learn about this kind of like standardization, how they can actually make it more practical. I think there are a number of startups in Korea is much more than we have in Quebec, but in particular, Canada is good in fundamental research. So we have many research institutes that are so big. So for example, I'm part of MILA, and MILA is one of the biggest AI research labs in Quebec, even in the world. Like we have more than 1,000 researchers, but we are focusing more on the fundamental research. And I think part of like this kind of collaboration can actually help bringing that fundamental research into practical application, but it actually requires context, right? So this kind of collaboration can actually help to bringing those kind of like cultural values, context in Korea, with kind of like Korean researchers also getting involved.
So as Dr. Fernandi has touched upon, Mr. Lim, could you also tell us about what makes this partnership between Canada and Korea, especially Quebec, so effective?
That's a great question. Just to piggyback off Golnuch's comments, Canada and Quebec, we definitely, I think they're a bit leader in more of the fundamental research. If I had to mention, we use something called TRL levels, technology readiness level. It's from 1 to 9. 1's kind of being developed, 9's almost ready for commercialization. I would say Canada and Quebec, with great professors like Dr. Fernandi, they're very good at fundamental. But what Canada and Quebec lacks, in my point of view, is after they kind of get that prototype MVP going, to really get it commercialized, they lack some of the infrastructure or the talent or some of the big players like Samsung, LG, because it's the LGs, Samsungs, and SK Hynix, for example. They have the, talent, but the capital and the know-how to be able to get that technology from maybe technology readiness like 4, 5, 6 to really get it going and commercialize it and start selling it. Because in the end, a product or service, if you could actually sell it and make money, that's where real innovation happens. So, and other examples, Canada and Quebec is a leader in AI. If you know, there's a partnership called GPay, Global Partnership in AI. It was launched around 2018-2020 with the leadership of France and Canada together during the G7. So in these kind of perspective, Canada and Quebec is a leader in terms of bringing the world together, let's do AI together. But Korea, they have the tech, they have the big conglomerates that know how to actually use this, give it to the citizens, the customers, have them actually use it and start innovating this way. I think this is a very big difference, but it's very comparative.
So it's a lot of give and take between the two countries. But speaking of, Quebec, it's well known as an AI hub. Could you tell us how this ecosystem has been built and what South Korea actually could learn from them?
Yes, so if you really think about AI, like the AI that we know today, like ChatGPT, LLMs, they haven't been around that long. But AI's, like actual fundamental AI has been around since like the 60s, 70s. If you think about AI, it's basically giving it some data, it analyzes and it gives you some sort of a result. So we had simple AI models since the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. But back then, when you mentioned AI, nobody really cared or they didn't even really know. They're like, oh, that's far away in the future. But so we call that kind of the AI winter time, where people didn't really do much about it. But the government of Canada and Quebec as well, they realized maybe it's not the time now, but let's continue to invest. Let's put a lot of talent, effort to attract the talent, create the ecosystem today. So maybe in 10, 20 years later, it'll actually show results. And that's actually what happened. So in the 90s, when there was AI winter, nobody really cared about AI that much. They attracted key talent such as Dr. Yoshua Benjo or Nobel laureate Geoffrey Hinton. So Hinton went to Toronto, Yoshua went to Montreal, and they set up their kind of labs and started Mila and the ecosystem. And then back then when people wanted to learn or do AI, yes, there's America as well, but not that many people did it. So they're like, if it's AI, let's go to Montreal and Toronto. And from 5 year, 10 year, 20 years, now we're seeing the fruits of that benefit. So
wow, it took a really long time.
Exactly.
So you have to continue digging in that part. Now, to one of the most highest moves, biggest moves recently, OpenAI is opening in Seoul. And I want to ask this question. It's a very straightforward question. Do you think South Korea is, Dr. Fernardi, do you think South Korea is ready to lead in AI? And could you also tell us why do we still fall behind in large-scale model development?
I think it's interesting that OpenAI is coming to Korea. I think there is a big market here, of course, right? So they are kind of going to benefit from this market. But I think Korea needs to think more long-term, to develop their own language models, to not be dependent on outsiders kind of like coming to this market. And part of the lack that I'm seeing in Korea is just the infrastructure that it needs to train such models, and also the data. I think like most of the models that are currently out there are trained based on the publicly available data. Publicly available data are mostly in English. So they are working very well in English, but in other languages there is so much of lacking. So one thing that Korea can actually do better is not only kind of like investing on infrastructure to train this model, but also creating better quality data, right? How it can actually benefit Korean culture and also have this data to kind of like representing the Korean language. And I think that can actually be better than kind of like bringing like other companies like OpenAI to open up the office here. They can actually compete with those, at least, if they can invest on this kind of infrastructure and data.
So creating better quality AI that's solely from Korea, that would be helpful. Now, these ecosystems actually also depend on talent powers, of course. It's really important. And OpenAI's entry highlights local R&D and education as well. Mr. Lim, what must Korea actually do to, attract and also maintain and keep top global AI talents?
So very good question. I think that's a question everyone's asking these days. I would say there's many things to talk about, but the one thing I really wanted to say is quality of life. I'm not saying Korea is a terrible place to live or anything, but generally if we do kind of a modeling, let's say, maybe you're an AI scientist, you have reasonable finances, you have the ability to go around the world, would you actually want to settle in Korea? For example, maybe some of the housing prices might be too much, or maybe the cost of education is too high, or maybe there's too much competition, etc. So yes, there's a tech part, education, ecosystem, that's very important too. But what I find out is people don't think about the quality of life part too much. So how to solve this is the government needs to obviously provide a better quality of life, maybe provide some subsidies for the children, for their education, maybe housing, whatnot. And in the Canadian Quebec perspective, how we attract talent is exactly that. Good quality of life. So I'm not saying, of course, all major cities these days, they're higher housing prices, whatnot, but it's at least still somewhat affordable. For example, in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver is a bit more expensive, but definitely compared to Korea, it's not. Also, there's less competition, so kids, it's easier to raise them there. Unlike Korea, where, of course, Korea is very well educated, but it's also quite competitive. So as a child, you might have to go to lots of academies, whatnot. But in Canada and Quebec, there's less of this. So maybe they have the time and the luxury to kind of follow a passion. If their passion is AI and development, then we will probably have a Nobel laureate right there. Yes, so there's many other factors, but one of the biggest thing I think is quality of life. Of course, I could go on, I could talk about things like visa and immigration. Korea is not exactly the easiest place to come for visa and immigration, even if you have the skills. Or there's other key things, maybe things like, maybe Korea needs to provide some safety nets in terms of maybe some acceptance of failure, because innovation, there'll always be risks of failure. And I'm not saying Korea is very bad, but because Korea is very competitive, everyone want to show the good things, they want to succeed. But of course, innovation, you also learn from the failures. But I think Korea is not as accepting of these kind of things. So I think these kind of cultures need to change. But one more thing I also wanted to add is, maybe to attract talent, Korea needs to send people more abroad and trying to bring them. for example, in the Quebec government office here in Korea, they have a dedicated science person like me who does a lot of this good work so that there's a lot of collaboration going on. But I feel that the Korean embassies abroad, yes, they have political people and all that stuff, but not so much the science tech innovation people. Because if they're there, they could promote Korea's science tech innovation, tell them how great it is, oh, great salaries, we have Samsung, we have this, great jobs, this and that, great universities, then they'll know and they could try to bring them. So maybe Korea needs to a little bit up the game in terms of international collaboration by actually sending people. And just to add to that, very recently we have good results where the science capital of Korea, Daejeon, there's a mayoral delegation in Quebec. They've signed agreements. And one of the things we'll do is we'll try to send the Daejeon official to actually stay in Quebec for like a year or two. So what they will do, they'll promote Daejeon, they'll do many of the international collaboration, but also promote Korea. And from that relation, maybe he or she will be able to attract talent this way.
So more exchanges and better settlement measures would be definitely important. Now, let's also shift gears in terms of responsibility. Of course, AI is getting bigger and bigger, and there's more responsibility that's going to be weighing in. As AI risks grow from misinformation to physical harm, why is safety very urgent, and what kind of roles should governments play to, maintain and, push through with ethics?
I think this is an interesting question. Why everyone thinks about safety of AI? Safety is not just about AI, so people actually think about safety in different technologies, right? But what is changing with respect to AI is just like different technologies, like when you're talking about kind of like airplane safety, right? Most of the times when you're thinking about safety is going to be physical harm. Right? However, in AI, it's not just physical. It can be misinformation, it can be like discrimination, it can be higher quality services to different group of people. So we have to actually have a spectrum of like harms that can be towards the society. First of all, like why people are thinking about safety of AI so seriously at this point is because we are actually developing the technology that has capabilities that we are not really know how they can actually kind of like people are going to use it, right? So people are currently using it for misinformation. You can see deep fake, etc. But like the capabilities are growing, like AI systems are getting better and better. And what we need to create to be more responsible with respect to kind of like how society is going to use it is going to create benchmarks and evaluation for this kind of capabilities. We currently lack this kind of evaluation and measurements, specifically for other languages. So even the measurements and benchmarks that we have often are created for English language. So we are lacking so much on kind of like measuring the harm towards a society, which is going to be outside of like English speaking. Even for English, we are still not there. And we also need to create more regulations and rules in order to create this kind of like safeguards around AI. And we have to also think more about like, it's not just about the technology, it's also about kind of like how the technology are going to be used and how it's going to be impact the society to create better technology for the society, right? So people are focusing so much on the race of creating bigger models. However, it's not just a bigger model, it's going to be how we are going to use these bigger models for society. And we can actually change the spectrum of like how we are using this AI system if we are thinking more responsibility about development of the AI.
Right, a very important point. This unmeasurable capabilities pose a lot of risks, and we must pay attention to that, of course. We are kind of running out of time, so we might have to jump to our last question. So finally, Dr. Fernardi, so looking beyond today's landscape, could you tell us, how do you think South Korea can evolve from fast adopter to a global model for a responsible AI innovation?
I'm working on responsible for more than 10 years now, right? And I see like still there is a lack of knowledge. Today, I gave a presentation. I asked the audience, have they heard about algorithmic discrimination? And there are a few hands only, right? However, I'm working on this field for 10 years. I think education is key. So we have to kind of bring this awareness about kind of like the risk of AI. And people should know like what they are facing. And media, like yourself, kind of like news coverage around this technology can actually help a lot. But also we have to create kind of like educational platforms at the university, even at the school. Like kids should know, like kids' safety is very important. They are not even aware of like this kind of like consequences of AI systems. And I think that's very, very important, this kind of like awareness. But also government should also spend funding for kind of like supporting research towards responsible AI. And I think this is also something that like Korea needs to improve with respect to kind of like a type of research that they are doing, and not focusing so much on creating technology, but kind of like more ethical and responsible technology.
So better education and also government support would be definitely helpful. We'll be looking forward to that. But I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Mr. Lim.
Thank you.
And also Dr. Fernardi, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.